Treasure of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Retold by John Escott. Chapter 1. The Pharaon Comes Home. On the 24th of February 1815, the ship Pharaon arrived at the port of Marseille. A large crowd was standing on the quay. The people had come down to the harbour to greet the ship. It was always exciting when a ship arrived in Marseille, and this ship had been built in the city, and the ship's owner lived there. The owner of the Pharaon was Monsieur Morel. He did not wait for his ship to reach the harbour. He immediately jumped into a longboat and rowed towards the Pharaon. A young man was standing on the deck of the Pharaon. When he saw Monsieur Morel, he went to the starboard side of the ship. The young man was the first officer of the Pharaon. He was tall, between 18 and 20 years old, and had thick black hair. His bright, dark eyes were calm and intelligent. The young man turned round and gave an order to the crew. The sailors ran quickly to their places and waited. Some men stood on the decks. Other men climbed up the tall masts. "Edmond! Edmond Dantes!" shouted Morel from the longboat. "Where is the captain? What's happened to Captain Leclerc?" "Something very sad, sir," replied the first officer. "When we were near Civitavecchia, we lost our brave captain." "And what has happened to the cargo?" the ship owner asked. "It's all safe, sir. But poor Captain Leclerc—" "What happened to him?" asked Morel. "Did he fall into the sea?" "No, sir. He suddenly became ill and died," said Dantes. "He died of brain fever. We buried him at sea." "Oh, poor Captain Leclerc. He was only 39 years old," said Morel. "But Edmond, we must all die one day. Did you say that the cargo is safe?" "Please, come aboard, sir," said Dantes. "Here is Danglars, the cargo master. You can ask him about our cargo. He'll also tell you more about the captain's death. I must give some orders to the crew." Dantes turned to the sailors on the deck. "Lower all the sails!" he shouted. Morel climbed up the side of the Pharaon and greeted Danglars. "You've heard our sad news, Monsieur Morel," said Danglars. The cargo master was 25 or 26 years old, and he always had an angry expression on his face. The crew of the Pharaon did not like him. "Yes, poor Captain Leclerc," said Morel. "He was a brave and honest man." "Yes, and he was an experienced man, not a boy," said Danglars. "He knew a lot about ships and the sea. He was the kind of captain that you need, sir." "But a sailor does not need to be old to understand his work, Danglars," said Morel. He watched Dantes give more orders to the crew. "Look at Edmond. He knows his work well." "Yes," said Danglars. He looked at Dantes, and his eyes were full of hate. Dantes is young and confident. He began to give orders to the crew before the captain had died. But he also made us lose a day and a half on the voyage. We stopped at the island of Elba." "Edmond is the first officer," said Morel. "A first officer has to sail a ship when a captain cannot do his work. But Edmond was wrong to lose time at Elba." Morel called to the young man. "Edmond, come here." "In a moment, sir," replied Dantes. He shouted to the men who were standing by the heavy chain which was attached to the anchor. "Drop the anchor!" he ordered. Immediately, the sailors let the heavy anchor drop into the sea, and the Pharaon stopped. "Do you see?" said Danglars. "Dantès is like a captain already." "He works well," said Morel. "He'll be captain soon." This news did not please Danglars. When Dantès came towards Morel, Danglars moved away. "You wanted to speak to me, sir?" said Dantès. "Yes," said Morel. "Why did you stop the ship at Elba?" "Captain Leclerc ordered me to go there," said Dantès. "Before he died, he gave me a packet. He told me to take it to Marshal Bertrand on the island." Morel moved closer to Dantès and spoke quietly. "And did you see Marshal Bertrand?" he asked. "Did you see Napoleon's advisor?" "Yes, sir." "And did you speak to the Emperor?" asked Morel. "He spoke to me," said Dantès, smiling. "Emperor Napoleon asked me questions about the Pharaon. I told him that the ship belonged to you, sir. Then Napoleon said, 'There was a soldier called Policar Morel in my army at Valence.'" "That's true," said Morel happily. "Policar Morel was my uncle. You were right to stop at Elba, Edmond. But don't tell anyone that you spoke with Napoleon. It could bring you trouble." "Why?" said Dantès calmly. "I didn't know what was in the packet. Napoleon only asked simple questions about the ship. He didn't talk about politics. Oh, excuse me, sir. The customs officers are coming aboard." And Dantès went to the side of the ship. Danglars came and stood beside Morel. "Did Dantès tell you why he delayed the voyage?" he asked. "He was obeying the last order from Captain Leclerc," replied Morel. "And did Dantès give you a letter from the captain?" "A letter?" said Morel. "A letter for me?" "The captain gave Dantès a letter, as well as the packet for Elba," said Danglars. "How do you know about the packet?" asked Morel. "I was going past the captain's cabin," Danglars said. "The door was open, and I saw the captain give the packet and a letter to Dantès." "He said nothing to me about a letter," said Morel. "But if there is a letter, Edmond will give it to me." Perhaps I made a mistake. Please say nothing about it to Dantès," said Danglars. The cargo master walked away when Dantès returned to the shipowner. "Edmond, will you come and have dinner with me this evening?" asked Morel. "Excuse me, sir, but I must visit my father tonight," said the young man. "Oh, yes," said Morel. "I haven't seen your father for a few weeks, but I think that he's well. You're a good son, Edmond. Visit your father, then come and see me." "Please excuse me again," said Dantès. "There is another person that I must see." "Of course," said Morel. "You'll want to see Mercedes. She visited me 3 times to ask about news of the Pharaon. Edmond, you have a very beautiful lover." "Mercedes isn't my lover. She is my fiancée," said Dantès. "She's the woman that I'm going to marry." "I wish you happiness and a long life," said Morel. "But tell me, did Captain Leclerc give you a letter for me before he died?" "No, sir," said Dantès. "Captain Leclerc couldn't write. Now, I must ask for some time away from my work. After my marriage, I have to go to Paris." "Take all the time that you need," said Morel. "The Pharaon will not sail for 3 or 4 months." He smiled and put a hand on Dantès' arm. "And the ship can't sail again without the new captain." "Do you mean that I shall be the captain of the Pharaon?" cried Dantès. "Oh, thank you, Monsieur Morel. My father and Mercedes will be very pleased. That's good, Edmond. Take the longboat and go to your father. Visit Mercedes in Les Catalans, and then come to me. Shall I take you ashore, sir? Asked Dantes. No, I'll stay aboard and speak to Danglars about the cargo, said Morel. Were you happy with his work on this voyage? Danglars doesn't like me, said Dantes quietly. We had an argument near the island of Monte Cristo. But I have nothing bad to say about his work. He's a good cargo master. You're a good man, Edmond, said Morel. Go now, and good luck to you. Morel watched the young man jump into the longboat. In a few minutes, Dantes had rowed to the quay. Morel turned away and saw Danglars standing a few meters away. The cargo master was staring at Dantes. He had an angry expression on his face. Chapter 2. Mercedes. Louis and Edmond Dantes lived in a small, simple house in one of the city's narrow streets. The old man gave a cry of joy when he saw his son. "My boy!" said Louis. The old man's face was pale, and his body began to shake. "What's wrong?" asked Edmond. "Are you ill?" "No, my dear son. I didn't know that the Pharaon had arrived in Marseille. This is a wonderful surprise. Tell me all the news of the voyage." "First, I have sad news, father," said Edmond. "Captain Leclerc is dead. I didn't want that to happen, of course, but now Monsieur Morel tells me that I'll be captain of the Pharaon. And I'll be paid well. Do you understand, father? I'm going to be a captain, and I'm not yet 20. "That is good news," said the old man in a weak voice. And he sat down in a chair. "There is something wrong," said Edmond. "You're ill." "I'm not ill," answered Louis. "I'm just a little tired." "You need a glass of wine," said Dantes. "Where do you keep the wine?" He began to look in the cupboards. There is no wine," said the old man. "What? Why is there no wine?" said Edmond. "Didn't I leave you enough money before the voyage? I gave you 200 francs before I left 3 months ago." "Yes," replied his father. "But I had to pay our debt to Caderousse." "But the debt to Caderousse was 140 francs, said Edmond. "Have you lived for 3 months on only 60 francs? He took all the money from his pockets and put it on the table. "Here, take this. I earned it on the voyage. Buy some food and drink immediately." Edmond heard footsteps outside the house. "Who's coming here now?" he said. "It's Caderousse," said the old man. "He'll be coming to give you his good wishes." "Then his lips will say one thing while his head thinks something else," Edmond said to himself. Caderousse came to the door. He was holding a piece of cloth in his hands. Caderousse was a tailor. His shop was beside the house where Louis and Edmond Dantes lived. "Edmond Dantes," said Caderousse, smiling and showing his white teeth. "You've returned." "Yes, Caderousse," said Edmond in a polite, cold voice. "Do you have a problem? Can I help you?" Caderousse smiled again. "Thank you," he said. "I don't want any help. But sometimes there are others who need me.
Not you, sirs. I gave you money, but you've paid me.
Caderousse walked round the room.
I met my friend Danglars in the city, he said. He told me that you were in Marseille again, Edmond.
The tailor's eyes shone brightly when he saw the money on the table.
And you're now a rich man, he said.
This money isn't mine, it's my father's, said Edmond.
Danglars told me that you're going to be the new captain of the Pharaon, said Caderousse. All your friends will be happy when they hear about your good luck. And I know one young lady who'll be pleased. Yes, Mercedes, said Louis. Edmond, go and see your fiancée. You were right to come home quickly, said Caderousse unpleasantly. Mercedes is a fine girl, and fine girls have many admirers. Go and see her, and give her your good news.
I will, said Edmond, and he left the house. Caderousse talked to the old man for a minute or two, then he left. He walked to the corner of the Rue Senac, where Danglars was waiting for him.
Did you see young Dantès? Asked Danglars. I did, said Caderousse, smiling. He believes that he will be captain of the Pharaon.
Dantès is not captain yet, said Danglars. Is he going to marry the beautiful Mercedes?
Yes, said Caderousse, but he could have trouble there. Mercedes has a handsome young admirer. He's a 21-year-old Catalan, and he's her cousin.
Danglars looked pleased about this.
Let's go to La Réserve and have a drink while we wait for news, he said.
100 meters from La Réserve Café was Les Catalans. Mercedes lived in a small white house in this village. She was a beautiful girl, with shining black hair, large dark eyes, and a pretty figure. She was 17 years old. Mercedes was talking to a tall young man. He was her cousin, Fernand.
Mercedes, said Fernand, please tell me that you will marry me.
He looked at Mercedes with love in his eyes. I've answered you 100 times, Fernand, said Mercedes. You must be very stupid to ask me again.
Don't you want me to be happy? Said Fernand. For 10 years I've dreamt that you'll be my wife. I love you, Mercedes.
Fernand, I've never done anything to make you love me, the girl replied. And I don't want to marry you. I love you like a brother, that is all.
You believe that Dantès will return, said Fernand. That is why you are saying this. But perhaps he doesn't love you now, or perhaps he's dead.
Fernand, cried Mercedes. I love Edmond.
And will you always love him, and not me? Fernand asked, holding Mercedes' hand.
I'll love him for as long as I live, said Mercedes.
But if he's dead?
Then I shall die too.
But perhaps he's forgotten you and... Mercedes! Called a voice from outside the house.
Oh! Cried the young girl. Her eyes shone with happiness. He's here! He hasn't forgotten me! And she ran to open the door. Edmond! I'm here! She said. In a moment, Dantès and Mercedes had their arms around each other. At first the lovers saw nothing around them, but then Dantès saw Fernand. Oh, he said, I didn't know that anyone else was here. This is my cousin Fernand, said Mercedes. He's my friend, and he'll be your friend too, Edmond. Hello, Fernand, said Dantès, and he politely held out his hand. But Fernand did not shake Edmond's hand. In fact, he did not move. He had an expression of hate on his face. I Didn't expect to meet an enemy here, said Dantes after a moment.
An enemy? Said Mercedes. There's no enemy here. There's only Fernand, who will shake your hand and greet you like a friend.
The young woman looked angrily at her cousin. As soon as he had shaken Dantes' hand, Fernand turned and left the house.
"Hello, Fernand," called a voice. "Where are you going?"
The speaker was the tailor, Caderousse. He was sitting outside La Réserve with Danglars. The two men had been drinking wine for several hours. Caderousse was now very drunk. Fernand looked at them for a few seconds. Then he came to their table and sat with them.
"You look like a disappointed lover, Fernand," said Caderousse, laughing loudly.
He gave the young man a glass of wine. Then he filled his own glass for the 8th or 9th time. "You didn't think that Dantes was going to return to Marseille so suddenly, did you?" said Danglars. "Perhaps you thought that he was dead, or perhaps you thought that he had found another lover. When is Dantes going to marry the beautiful Mercedes?" "They haven't chosen a date yet," said Fernand.
"No, but their wedding will be soon," said Caderousse. "Let's drink to the marriage of Captain Edmond Dantes and the beautiful Mercedes."
As he lifted his glass, he spilt wine on his clothes. Fernand threw his glass of wine onto the ground, and Caderousse laughed loudly. Then he saw two young people walking towards the café.
"Ah, look, Fernand," he said. "Two lovers are coming this way. See how they kiss each other's lips and look into each other's eyes? It's Edmond and Mercedes."
Fernand's face had become red, and he looked down at the table.
"Hello, Dantes," called Caderousse.
He lifted his wine glass again.
"Are you too proud to speak to your friends?"
"No, sir," replied Dantes. "When is your wedding day?" asked Danglars. "Tomorrow or the next day," said Dantes. "We'll have the wedding feast here in La Réserve. Please come and celebrate with us. There will be good food and wine. After the feast, Mercedes and I will go to the priest and he'll marry us." "You are marrying quickly, Captain?" said Danglars. Dantes smiled. "I'm not a captain yet," he said. "But you are marrying quickly," said Danglars. "I want to get married soon, because I must go to Paris after the wedding," Dantes replied. "Paris?" said Danglars. "Do you have business there?" "Captain Leclerc asked me to do something for him," said Dantes, and he and Mercedes began to walk away. "I suspect that he's going to deliver Bertrand's letter," said Danglars to himself. "And that gives me an idea." Chapter 3. The Letter. Danglars watched Dantes and Mercedes walk away. Then he turned to the young Catalan. "Fernand, do you love Mercedes?" he asked.
"Yes," said Fernand. "I love her more than Dantes loves her. I want to kill Dantes. But if he dies, Mercedes will kill herself. She told me this."
"Perhaps you can stop the wedding. Then Dantes would not have to die," said Danglars. He called to a waiter. "Bring me a pen and some paper." A few minutes later, the waiter brought a pen, a pot of ink, and some pieces of paper to the table.
Dantes stopped at the island of Elba during our voyage, Danglars told Fernand. Perhaps he met Bonaparte there. If someone told the prosecutor of Marseille that Dantes was a special agent for the Bonapartists, Dantes would be arrested.
"I'll tell the prosecutor," cried Fernand.
"No, you mustn't do that," said Danglars. "Dantes would suspect that you told the prosecutor about his visit to Elba. No, a letter will be perfect."
The cargo master smiled and began to write a letter.
Danglars usually wrote with his right hand, but now he slowly wrote the letter with his left hand. He was disguising his handwriting. "This letter is from a friend of the king. Edmond Dantes, first officer of the ship Pharaon, is going to deliver a letter to friends of Napoleon in Paris. You will find proof of this crime when you arrest him, or you will find proof at his father's house."
When he had finished writing, Danglars addressed the letter to the prosecutor of Marseille. Caderousse had been sleeping for a few minutes. Now he suddenly lifted his head and opened his eyes. He saw the letter that Danglars had written.
"No!"
Caderousse cried.
"Dantes is my friend!"
The drunken tailor tried to take the letter from Danglars, but he moved too quickly and nearly fell off his chair. Danglars threw the letter onto the floor in the corner of the cafe.
"Don't worry about the letter, my friend," he said to Caderousse. "It was just a bad joke. You've had too much wine. I'll take you home. Fernand, will you come with us?" "No," said Fernand. "I'm going home."
When Danglars and Caderousse were 20 meters from the cafe, Danglars looked back. He smiled. He saw Fernand pick up the letter and walk away quickly. Many guests came to Dantes and Mercédès' wedding feast. Some of them were men from the Pharaon. When Morel came into the cafe, he told the sailors that Dantes was going to be their new captain. They were pleased. Mercédès and Edmond were standing with Louis Dantes and Fernand. Danglars and Caderousse went to talk to them. Caderousse told Edmond that Morel had arrived at the feast. "This is the happiest day of my life," Edmond said, smiling. He looked at Mercédès with love in his eyes. "It's 1:15. At 2:30, my dear Mercédès will become Madame Dantes." The guests feasted on the good food and fine wine. They wished good luck to Dantes and Mercédès. Soon it was time for the young people to meet the priest. "Come with us, everyone!" cried Dantes. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. "Open, in the name of the law!" called a voice. No one spoke, and no one moved. The door opened, and an officer of police and 5 soldiers walked in. The soldiers were all carrying guns. "Why are you here, sir?" Morel asked the police officer. The man did not reply. "Which of you is Edmond Dantes?" he asked. "I am," said Edmond. "What do you want?" "Edmond Dantes, I'm here to arrest you," said the officer. Mercédès cried out and began to weep. "This must be a mistake," said Morel. "What crime am I accused of?" asked Dantes. "You'll be told later," said the officer. Caderousse whispered to Danglars. "What does this mean?" I don't know, replied Danglars. Caderousse looked for Fernand, but he could not see him in the café.
"This is about that letter,"
he said to Danglars. "Don't be stupid," said the cargo master.
"But—"
began Caderousse. "Be quiet, you fool," said Danglars. "You drank too much wine yesterday. You know nothing about it." Dantès was saying goodbye to his friends. "Don't worry," he said. "This is a mistake. I'll return very soon." Dantès went down the stairs with the police officer and the soldiers. A carriage was waiting outside La Réserve, and he was pushed into it. Mercédès ran down the stairs to the street. She looked through the window of the carriage. "Goodbye, my dearest Edmond," she cried. "Goodbye, Mercédès," called Dantès. "We'll soon meet again." Then the horses jumped forward and pulled the carriage down the street. In a few minutes, the carriage had gone around a corner and disappeared. "Wait for me here, all of you," said Morrel. "I'll follow Dantès. The officer will take him to the prosecutor's office, I am sure. I'll go there. I'll bring you news as soon as I can." At that moment, Fernand came into the room and sat down. His face was very pale. He had a glass of water in his hand. His hand shook as he drank from the glass.
"This is all Fernand's work, I'm sure,"
Caderousse said to Danglars quietly. "No, he couldn't have done this," said Danglars. "He's too stupid." Time passed slowly, but at last Morrel returned to the café. He had a worried expression on his face. Mercédès, Louis, and all the guests came and stood round him. "Dantès is in serious trouble," said Morrel. "He is accused of treason. Prosecutor Villefort said, 'Dantès is a traitor to the king. He is a Bonapartist agent.'" Mercédès cried out, and Louis Dantès sat down on a chair. Caderousse moved closer to Danglars.
"You lied to me," he whispered. "The letter that you wrote yesterday reached the prosecutor of Marseille. But I can't let an old man and an innocent girl die of unhappiness. I'll tell the prosecutor that Dantès is not guilty." "Be silent, you fool," said Danglars. He held Caderousse's arm. "Perhaps Dantès isn't innocent. Who can be sure? The Pharaon did stop at Elba, and Dantès did go ashore. Perhaps he has Bonapartist letters or papers with him. The prosecutor will find them. But there is danger for us. Any friend of Dantès, or anyone who works with him, will be suspected of treason too." Caderousse thought for a moment. "We'll wait and see if Dantès is guilty or innocent," he said.
The guests began to leave the café. Louis Dantès' friends took him back to his house, and Fernand took Mercédès to her home. Very soon everyone in Marseille had heard the news of Edmond's arrest. Later that day, Morrel saw Danglars and Caderousse. "Can you believe that this has happened, Danglars?" Morrel said. "Dantès, arrested for treason." "I was suspicious when Dantès stopped the Pharaon at Elba," said Danglars. "Remember, I told you this when the ship returned on 24th February. Yes. Did you tell your suspicions to anyone else?" asked Morrel. "No, I didn't," said the cargo master. "You're a good man, Danglars," said Morrel. "And the Pharaon has no captain now." "The Pharaon cannot leave Marseille for 3 months," said Danglars. "We have to make some repairs to Pharaon. Then we have to load a cargo onto the ship. Let's hope that Dantes is a free man again after 3 months. Until then, I can take care of the ship for you." "Thank you, Danglars. I'll go and see Prosecutor Villefort again. I'll ask for news of Dantes. Go to the ship. I'll meet you there later." The ship owner walked away, and Danglars turned to Caderousse. "All goes well," he said to the tailor.
"But your false letter to Villefort," began Caderousse.
"Fernand must have sent the letter," said Danglars. "He's jealous of Dantes. He wants Mercédès for himself. He must have picked up the letter. Did he copy it onto another piece of paper, or did he send my letter? Luckily I disguised my handwriting. The prosecutor won't know that I betrayed Dantes."
"But is Dantes a traitor, a Bonapartiste?" said Caderousse.
"Perhaps. We must say nothing," said Danglars. "If there is trouble, then it was Fernand who betrayed Dantes." Yes, you're right. We'll say nothing," said Caderousse, and he began to feel a little happier. Chapter 4. Villefort. In a large house in the centre of Marseille, another wedding feast was taking place. Some of the most important people in Marseille were guests at this celebration. They were talking about Napoleon. "Bonaparte will never rule France again," they said. "He's gone forever. He's exiled to the island of Elba. A king rules our country again." An old man stood up and lifted his glass of wine. "Let's drink to the health of King Louis," he said. The man was the Marquis de Saint-Méran, and he was a rich and powerful politician. Other guests lifted their glasses and repeated the old man's words. One of the men who drank to the health of the king was Gérard de Villefort. Villefort was a very happy man. This was his wedding feast. He was going to be married to Renée Saint-Méran, the daughter of the Marquis Saint-Méran. Although he was only 27, Villefort had an important position in the city. He was the prosecutor of Marseille. Villefort smiled happily. He knew that his career would improve after the marriage. An hour later, Villefort received a message and returned to his office. His friend, the shipowner Morel, was waiting outside the house. "Edmond Dantes, the first officer of my ship, has been arrested," said Morel. "I know," said Villefort. "I'm going to speak to Dantes now. I was told that he had been brought here." "Dantes is an honest man," said Morel. "I'm sure that he's innocent. He isn't a traitor. The charge must be wrong." "Don't worry," said Villefort. "I'll find out if he's a traitor or not." Villefort went into his house and gave an order to a police officer. A few minutes later, Villefort was sitting in his office. He was looking at the pale, calm face of a young suspect who was standing in front of him. "Who and what are you?" the prosecutor asked. "My name is Edmond Dantes," replied the young man. "I am the first officer of the Pharaon, which is owned by Monsieur Morel." "What is your age?" 19. "What were you doing when you were arrested?" "I was at my wedding feast," answered Dantes. "I was going to be married." Villefort saw Dantes' happiness when he said this. He thought of his own wedding feast. He quickly continued with his questions. "Were you ever a sailor in Napoleon's navy? Or are you a supporter of Napoleon now?" asked Villefort coldly. "No, sir." "Do you have strong political opinions?" asked Villefort. I don't have any political opinions, replied Dantes. I know nothing about politics.
Do you have any enemies?
Asked Villefort. Only powerful, important people have enemies, Dantes replied. And I'm not an important person.
And what do the crew of the Pharaon think of you? Asked the prosecutor.
The men who work with me love me like a brother, and they respect me.
Is anyone jealous of you?
Said Villefort. You're only 19, but you're going to be a captain soon, and you're going to marry a pretty girl who loves you. Perhaps someone is jealous of your good luck. Villefort took a letter from his pocket and gave it to Dantes. Do you recognize the writing on this letter? Dantes' face became pale. He began to be afraid. No, I don't recognize this writing, he said. The words look strange. Perhaps the writing is disguised. But the person who wrote this letter must hate me. Now, tell me the truth, said Villefort. Are you a traitor? Are you an agent for Bonaparte? Is anything in this letter correct? No, yes, said Dantes. I'll tell you what happened. The Pharaon was taking a cargo from Smyrna to Marseille. We were going to stop at Trieste and Naples. When we left Naples, Captain Leclerc became ill. He had brain fever. He was very ill for several days. There was no doctor on the ship, and we could not help the captain. Before he died, Captain Leclerc called me to his cabin. My dear Dantes, he said, I have something to ask you. I want you to make me a promise. After my death, take the ship to the island of Elba. Go to the fortress on Elba and find Napoleon's adviser. His name is Marshal Bertrand. Give him this packet. Perhaps he'll give you a letter and some orders. Promise that you will do this. I made the promise, and the next day Captain Leclerc died. What did you do after he died? Asked Villefort. I sailed to Elba and went ashore alone, said Dantes. I gave the packet to Marshal Bertrand. He gave me a letter for someone in Paris. After my marriage, I was going to take it to Paris. Well, your story sounds true, said Villefort. And you were only following the orders of your captain. Give me the letter from Bertrand. You must promise to return here if I need to see you again. Am I free, sir? Yes, said Villefort. But first give me Bertrand's letter. You have it, sir, said Dantes. The police officer took it from me when I was arrested. He pointed at Villefort's desk. The letter is in that packet of documents. Dantes turned to leave the room. Villefort looked down at the packet on his desk. Wait, he said. What name was on the letter? Monsieur Noirtier, 13 Rue Coqueron, Paris, said Dantes. Villefort picked up the packet and opened it. There was now an expression of fear on his face. Monsieur Noirtier, 13 Rue Coqueron, he said. His face had become very pale, and his hand shook as he picked up the letter. Yes, said Dantes. Do you know the gentleman? What? No, answered Villefort. I'm not a friend of the king's enemy. Dantes now began to feel afraid again. I don't know what is written in the letter, he said. But you knew that it was addressed to Monsieur Noirtier, said Villefort. Did you show this letter to anyone? No, sir, said Dantes. Villefort opened the letter and read it. Then he put his hands over his face. What is the matter? Asked Dantes. Villefort looked at the letter again. Does Dantes know what is in this letter? He thought. Does he know that Noirtier is my father? And does he know that Noirtier is a supporter of Napoleon? If he does know this, then my career is ruined." Villefort tried to speak calmly. "Dantès," he said, "before I let you go, I must speak with someone. You must stay here a little longer. The only problem for you is this letter, and—" He stood up, went across to the fireplace, and threw the letter into the flames. "You see? It's gone." "Thank you, sir. You're very kind," said Dantès. "Say nothing about this to anyone," said Villefort. "If anyone asks you about the letter, you know nothing about it." Villefort opened the door and called a police officer. He spoke quietly to the officer. Then he turned to Dantès. "Follow this officer," he said. When they had gone, Villefort walked round the room. "Oh, Father," he cried, "your political opinions are going to harm my career and my happiness." Then he remembered the words in the letter. "But perhaps there is a way that your politics can help me," he said. He sat down at his desk and wrote a letter to the king's advisor in Paris. Chapter 5. The Chateau d'If. Dantès was taken from Villefort's office and locked in a small room. At 10 o'clock that evening, 4 soldiers came to the room. They took him outside to a carriage that was waiting in the street. Dantès looked at the soldiers. "Where are you taking me?" he asked. "You'll soon know," said the officer. "We can't tell you." Then a soldier pushed his gun against the young man's back, and they all got into the carriage. The carriage went quickly through the streets of the city and down to the harbour. A longboat with 4 sailors in it was waiting at the quay. The soldiers put Dantès into the boat. Then they got into it too. The sailors picked up the oars and began to row the boat out of the harbour. "Where are you taking me?" asked Dantès. "Don't you know?" said the officer. "Turn round and look." Dantès turned. The boat had passed the entrance of the port. On the left he saw the dark shadow of the island of Ratonneau, and on the right he saw the black shape of the island of If. On the top of steep rocks was a great prison fortress, the Chateau d'If. The thick stone walls of the prison had stood for 300 years. Many stories were told about this terrible place. "The Chateau d'If!" cried Dantès. But Monsieur de Villefort promised—" "I don't know what Monsieur de Villefort promised," said the officer. "We have to take you there. Those were our orders." "No, stop!" Dantès had stood up. He tried to jump out of the boat and into the sea, but 2 of the soldiers held him, and he fell back into the boat. The officer pointed his gun at Dantès. "If you move again, I'll shoot you," he said. Half an hour later, the longboat reached the island of If. The soldiers pulled Dantès out of the boat and held his arms behind his back. Then they pushed him up the wet stone steps and through the gate of the prison. Dantès looked around. He was in a courtyard which was surrounded by high walls. It was now completely dark. The only light came from a few lamps that were fixed to the walls. The soldiers and their prisoner waited in the courtyard for 10 minutes. Then a voice called, "Where is the prisoner?" "Here," replied the soldiers. "I'll take him to a cell," said the voice. It was one of the jailers. "Let him follow me." The soldiers pushed Dantès forward. "Go," they said. The young man followed the jailer to a small room which had stone walls and a thick wooden door.
"You'll stay here tonight," the jailer said. "The governor is asleep. Perhaps he'll see you tomorrow. Here is bread, water, and a bed. You now have everything that a prisoner can want."
Before Dantes could answer him, the jailer shut and locked the door and went away. Dantes stood alone in the darkness. For the rest of the night he did not sleep. He walked round and round the cell. In the morning the jailer returned.
"Are you hungry?"
he asked. "I want to see the governor," said Dantes. The jailer shook his head and left the cell. Dantes threw himself onto the floor and wept tears of anger. "What is my crime? I've done nothing wrong," he shouted. "Why am I in this terrible place?" At the same time the next morning, the jailer returned. "I want to see the governor," Dantes said again.
"It's not allowed,"
the jailer told him. "What is allowed?"
"If you have money, you can buy better food and books to read," said the jailer. "If you behave well, you can walk outside for a few minutes each day. Perhaps one day you might meet the governor."
"How long will I have to wait before I see the governor?" asked Dantes.
"A month, 6 months, a year," the jailer replied.
"I can't wait that long," said Dantes. "I want to see him now."
"If you wish for impossible things," said the jailer, "you'll go mad. There was a prisoner here who tried to buy his freedom. He told us that he would give us 1,000,000 francs. He was kept in this cell."
"When did he leave it?" asked Dantes.
2 years ago."
"Did the governor let him go free?"
"No. The prisoner went mad. He was put in a dungeon."
"If you help me, I'll give you 300 francs, said Dantes. "Please go to Marseille, find a young girl called Mercedes, and give her a letter from me."
"I can't do that," said the jailer. "I would lose my job, and I don't want your money. I earn 2,000 francs a year."
"Then one day I'll hit you when you enter this cell," said Dantes.
"You are going mad," said the jailer.
He went out and returned with 4 soldiers.
"Take this prisoner to the dungeon," he said. "Put him in cell 34. This man is now prisoner number 34.
Villefort was going to Paris to see the king's adviser. Before he left Marseille, a beautiful young girl stopped his carriage in the street. It was Mercedes. She spoke to Villefort through the carriage window. "Sir, where is Edmond Dantes?" she asked. "I can't tell you," said Villefort. "I don't know. I can do nothing for him. Now step away from my carriage." As Villefort travelled towards Paris, he thought about Dantes. He had sent an honest young man to the terrible Château d'If. He had ended the happiness of an innocent young man and his beautiful fiancée. Chapter 6. The King. Louis XVIII, the King of France, was in his favourite room in his palace. Louis was reading a book of poetry, and at the same time he was listening to some advice from a small 50-year-old man. "Majesty, I'm worried," said the man. His name was the Duc de Blacas, and he was the king's friend and adviser. "What are you worried about, Blacas?" asked the king, turning the pages of his book.
"I believe that trouble is coming from the south of the country," said Blacas. "Will you send men into the provinces of Languedoc, Provence and Dauphiné? Send honest men that you can trust. Ask them to find out the feelings of the people in these southern provinces. Majesty, I'm afraid that Bonaparte, or some of his supporters, are planning to kill you.
Are you trying to frighten me, my friend? Said the king.
I've received a letter from a man in the south, Majesty, said Blacas. I trust this man. The letter said that there is a plot against you. You are in great danger, Majesty.
At that moment, d'André, the Minister of Police, entered the room.
"Come in, d'André,"
cried the king.
"Tell Blacas the latest news about Bonaparte. Blacas is trying to frighten me. He's talking about a plot by the Bonapartists."
Monsieur Blacas, d'André said to the Duke, there is good news from Elba. My officers have reported that Bonaparte is very tired, and they say that very soon he will be mad.
Mad? Said Blacas.
Yes, answered d'André. Sometimes Napoleon weeps, sometimes he laughs like a madman. 2 or 3 older members of his staff wanted to come back to France. Then Napoleon said, "Go and serve the good king." Those were his words.
"Well, Blacas,"
said King Louis,
"what do you think about this news?"
"Perhaps I was wrong about Bonaparte's plans," said Blacas to the king. "But please speak to the person who sent me the information."
"Oh, very well,"
said Louis.
He put down his book and picked up a document from his desk. He turned towards the Minister of Police.
"Now, d'André, do you have a new report from Elba? I've read this report, which has a date of 20th February. Today is 4th March.
"Majesty, a new report will arrive very soon," said d'André. "Perhaps it's arrived since I left my office."
"Then go and find out," said the king. "I'll wait here."
"I'll return in 10 minutes," said d'André, and he left the room quickly.
"I'll go and find my messenger, Majesty,"
said Blacas.
"Who is your messenger?"
asked the king.
"Gerard de Villefort," said Blacas. "He's the prosecutor of Marseille."
"Villefort?" cried the king. "Why didn't you tell me his name earlier?"
"Majesty, I didn't think that you would know it," said Blacas.
"But I do, Blacas," said the king. "I know all about Villefort. He's clever and ambitious. He'll be useful to us. And you know his father's name?"
"His father, Majesty?"
"Yes," replied Louis. "Villefort's father is called Noirtier."
"Noirtier? The Bonapartiste?" said Blacas.
He was surprised.
"Majesty, do you wish to employ the son of a Bonapartiste?"
"Villefort wants to improve his career," said the king.
"He wants more power. He'll sell his own father to get that power. Where is Villefort now?"
"He's outside the palace," said Blacas. "He's waiting in my carriage."
"Bring him to me at once," said the king.
Blacas returned with Villefort a few minutes later.
"Villefort,"
said the king,
"the Duc de Blacas tells me that you have some interesting information for me."
"Majesty," said Villefort, bowing towards King Louis, "I have news of a plot against you. Bonaparte has left Elba, and he's going to Italy. He's either going to the city of Naples or somewhere on the coast of Tuscany. I'm afraid that I do not know which place, but you know that he has friends in Italy and France."
"Yes," said Louis. "Where did you get this information?"
"I got it from a man in Marseille," replied Villefort. "My men had been watching him for some time. I suspected that the man was a traitor. My men arrested him, and I questioned him. Then I immediately came to Paris."
"Who is this man?"
asked Louis.
And why do you suspect that he's a traitor?
Majesty, the man is a sailor, replied Villefort. He went to the island of Elba and met Marshal Bertrand there. Bertrand gave the sailor a message for a Bonapartist in Paris.
What is the name of this Bonapartist? Asked the king.
The sailor wouldn't tell me the man's name, said Villefort. But the message told the people of Paris that Bonaparte was returning soon, and it promised that Bonaparte would rule France again.
And where is this sailor now?
He's in prison, Majesty.
Do you think that this is a serious plot?
Asked the king. I do, Majesty, said Villefort. I left my own wedding feast to come here and give you the news.
Is it true that you're going to marry the daughter of the Marquis de Saint-Méran? Asked Louis.
Yes, Majesty, said Villefort. Mademoiselle Renée de Saint-Méran is my fiancée.
Very well, said Louis. Now don't worry about this plot, Villefort. My men have been watching the Mediterranean coast for 10 months. But thank you for coming to me.
Ah, here is Dandré, said Blacas.
The Minister of Police had come into the room. He was holding a report in his hand, and he had a worried expression on his face.
What's the matter, Dandré?
Asked the king.
Majesty,
began the minister. His voice was shaking.
Well, said the king, tell me what has happened.
I have a new report, said Dandré. Napoleon left Elba on 26th February, and he came ashore on 1st March.
Where did he come ashore?
Asked the king quickly.
Majesty, he came ashore near the town of Antibes, said Dandré.
He came ashore on 1st March? And you only heard the news today? Today is 4th March.
The king was angry now.
Majesty, it's true,
said the Minister of Police unhappily.
Napoleon is in France,
said Louis, shaking his head. Majesty, said Villefort, the people of the southern provinces hate Napoleon. If he's there, it'll be easy to get the people of Languedoc and Provence to fight against him.
Yes, that is true, said Dandré. But Napoleon has quickly travelled north. He's moved through the towns of Gap and Sisteron in the eastern part of Dauphiné province.
Is he coming to Paris?
Asked the king. Dandré did not answer. The king turned towards Villefort.
What about the province of Dauphiné? He asked. Will the people of Dauphiné fight against Napoleon? Will they support me?
No, Majesty, said Villefort sadly. They're Bonapartists.
Dandré, how many men are with Napoleon? Asked the king.
I don't know,
answered Dandré.
Dandré! The king shouted. You have an office, a police department, and 1,500 francs to pay special agents. You have these things so that you can find out what is happening in France, but you don't know what is happening in one area, the southern coast. Then a prosecutor from a city in the south comes to me with information. He has learned more than you and all your police officers.
Dandré looked at Villefort with an expression of hate.
I trust you, Blacas, said the king, turning to his adviser. You told me of your suspicions, and you brought Villefort to me when others might have sent him away.
Majesty, we can be sure of your army, said Blacas. All your soldiers support you. All reports say—
Reports? Said the king. How can we know that any reports are correct? But I remember something that may be important. You told me that General Quesnel died here in Paris, in the Rue Saint-Jacques. What have you found out about his death?"
"The Rue Saint-Jacques," cried Villefort suddenly. "Oh, I'm sorry, Majesty, but—"
"Go on,"
the king said to Villefort.
Majesty, said d'André quickly, I have news about General Quesnel. He didn't kill himself. He was murdered. He disappeared one evening after he left a Bonapartist club. He was going to meet someone in the Rue Saint-Jacques. A stranger had called at his house that morning. One of Quesnel's servants heard the stranger say the name of the street, but not the number of the house, and we don't know the name of this stranger.
When d'André told the king this, Villefort's face went pale. The king turned to him.
"Villefort," he said, "Quesnel was not one of Napoleon's agents. He worked for me. He was loyal to me. He was trying to find information about Napoleon, but I believe that his murderer was one of Napoleon's supporters."
Majesty, do we know any more about the stranger who went to Quesnel's house? Asked Villefort. D'André answered the question.
Quesnel's servant said that the stranger was about 50 years old. The man had black hair and thick black side whiskers. He wore a blue coat and a hat with a broad brim. Yesterday, one of my agents followed a man who looked like this, but they lost the man between the Rue de la Jussienne and the Rue Coqueron.
As he listened to d'André, Villefort felt ill. His legs became weak. He thought that he was going to fall to the ground.
"Continue to look for this man, d'André,"
ordered the king. Then he turned to Villefort.
"You must be tired after your journey," he said. "Go and rest. Did you stop at your father's house before you came here?"
No, Majesty," replied Villefort. "As soon as I arrived in Paris, I went to Monsieur de Blacas's house."
"Ah, I forgot,"
said the king. He smiled, but he also looked carefully at the prosecutor.
"You and your father are not good friends. He's a Bonapartist, and you are loyal to me. I thank you for your loyalty. Take this."
Then Louis took a medal from his own coat and gave it to Villefort. "Majesty," said Villefort, "this is an officer's medal. Only army officers who have served bravely receive these medals."
"Take it," said Louis again. "If you cannot serve me here in Paris, you may be able to serve me better in Marseille."
Chapter 7. Monsieur Noirtier. Villefort returned to the hotel where he was staying. He called a servant and gave some orders. First, he asked for some breakfast. Then he asked for his carriage to be ready in 2 hours. He was eating his breakfast when the servant came into the room again. The servant told Villefort that someone had come to see him. "Who is it?" asked Villefort. "I don't know," replied the servant. "The gentleman won't tell me his name, but he wants to speak to you." "What does this person look like?" "He's about 50. He has black hair and black side whiskers. He's wearing a blue coat and a hat with a broad brim." "It's him," thought Villefort. At that moment, the man came into the room. "Father," said Villefort. He turned to the servant. "Go," he said. Noirtier waited until the servant was out of the room. Then he turned to his son. "Gerard, you aren't very pleased to see me," he said. "Father," said Villefort, "I am pleased to see you, but I'm a little surprised. I came to Paris to save you."
You came to save me, said Noirtier. Tell me why.
Have you heard of the Bonapartist club in the Rue Saint-Jacques? Asked Villefort.
Yes, replied Noirtier. The club is in a house at number 53.
General Quesnel went there recently, said Villefort. He left his house at 9 o'clock in the evening, and his body was found in the river Seine the next day. He had been murdered. You're in danger, Father. The king's agents are looking for supporters of Bonaparte.
And who told you this story? Asked Noirtier.
The king, replied Villefort.
Then I'll tell you another story, said Noirtier.
I think that I know it already, said Villefort. Is it the news about Napoleon? I knew it before you did. 3 days ago I knew that Bonaparte was returning to France. I left Marseille immediately and came to Paris.
How did you know about this 3 days ago? Said Noirtier. 3 days ago, Napoleon hadn't come ashore.
I read a letter that had come from Elba. It was addressed to you. I found it in the pocket of Bonaparte's messenger. Father, if anyone else had found it, you would be dead now. You would have been executed. Noirtier laughed.
Executed? I don't believe that. Where is this letter now?
I burnt it, said Villefort. It was a dangerous letter.
It was dangerous for both of us, said Noirtier. But I fear nothing while you are taking care of me.
I've done more than take care of you, Father, replied Villefort. I've saved your life. General Quesnel was a special agent for the king. Quesnel's death was not an accident. He was murdered. The king himself said that the general was murdered.
The king? Said Noirtier. Doesn't Louis know that there are no murders in politics? In politics, there are no men. There are only ideas. In politics, we don't kill a man. We remove something that is in our way. We thought that Quesnel was a loyal Bonapartist. We invited him to the club and told him our plans. When he'd heard and understood everything, he told us that he was loyal to the king. He promised to say nothing about what he had heard, but we didn't believe him. We let him go free, but he didn't return home. What does that mean? Quesnel had an accident, that's all.
Be careful, Father, said Villefort. Napoleon's return is important for your plans, but Napoleon will not get far. He'll be followed and caught like a wild animal.
Oh no, my son, said Noirtier. Napoleon is on his way to Grenoble at this moment. On 10th or 12th March he will be at Lyons, and on 20th or 25th March he will be here in Paris.
He has only a few men with him, said Villefort. The army will stop him.
The army is loyal to Napoleon, said Noirtier. The army will bring him to Paris. The people of Grenoble will be happy to give their town to him. Everyone in Lyons will welcome our emperor. Gerard, I knew that you had arrived in Paris half an hour after you came into the city. You told nobody where you were staying, but I found you.
The king's agents may be stupid, said Villefort, but they know what you look like. They know that a man with black hair, black whiskers, and a blue coat went to Quesnel's house, and they may catch the man with the blue coat soon.
Then that man must make a few changes, said Noirtier.
He pulled off his blue coat and went to a table in the corner of the room. He took his son's razor from the table and shaved off his whiskers. Then he cut his hair. He picked up his son's brown coat and put it on.
Do you think that the police will recognize me now?
No, Father.
Will you see the king again, Gerard?
Asked Noirtier. Perhaps, said Villefort.
Then give Louis this message. You're wrong about the people of France. Bonaparte is coming. He'll be welcomed. The people want Napoleon to be their emperor again. Go now and leave France to its real master. He will not hurt you. Tell King Louis this, Gerard, or tell him nothing. Tell no one why you've come to Paris. Return quickly to Marseille. Goodbye, my son.
Noirtier left the room. Villefort went to the window and watched his father disappear round the corner of the street. Then he burned his father's coat and hat. An hour later, Villefort began his journey home to Marseille.